Okay, obviously that was not real money, but hopefully that will illustrate to you that if you are bluffing too much, you are lighting money on fire. My name is Jack Christensen, and I'm the owner and founder of Level X Poker. Do me a solid and subscribe to this YouTube channel. And without further ado, let's get into it. So you've probably heard pros talk about how people underbluff at low stakes, but that is in very specific spots. The one spot that is very underbluffed in low stakes poker is 4-betting. So you're 4-betting pre-flop. In low stakes poker, that is a spot where people usually just have it. They are not bluffing in those spots. Another spot that is underbluffed in low stakes poker is the river. You get check raised on the river at low stakes. It can be a bluff, but it's very, very rare. It's a spot that is significantly underbluffed by population at low stakes poker. That said, I have seen a ton of beginning players who are actively trying to improve, which I'm assuming you are if you're watching this video. I've seen them way overbluff. And the reason for that is because I hear people say that low stakes poker is underbluffed, so they vastly overadjust. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the natural progression of becoming a winning and crushing player. And the good thing is that it's easy to fix. All you have to do is lower the bluffing frequency until you get to that sweet spot. So let's first understand basics of bluffing. Bluffing is an essential part of becoming a winning poker player. Bluffing is essentially when you believe that you have a worse hand than your opponent, and you put money into the pot with the hope that they fold so you get to take down the pot that you otherwise would have lost. Bluffing is essential for a few reasons. The first of which is simply the blinds. Why is that? Well, if we didn't have the blinds or antes or anything to force you to put the money in the pot, then the optimal poker strategy would be play aces and only pocket aces. But because you have to put money in the pot in the form of blinds and sometimes antes, you have to play other hands because you don't get aces very often. When you know your opponent is playing more than just aces, that means that they don't always have the best hand. And so you can represent a better hand than them, which is what bluffing essentially is. Another reason bluffing is essential is because if you are only putting money in the pot when you have very strong hands, it becomes very easy for the other players at the table to just fold. A great example of this is Old Man Coffee. Old Man Coffee is not playing poker to become a crusher. Right? Old Man Coffee is there to kill time, to talk to his friends, to have some food, maybe flirt with the waitress, right? He's not there to become a crushing player. He's just there to pass the time and lose the minimum amount possible. If you're trying to become a crushing poker player, you have to bluff. You don't bluff, people are just going to fold and you will not make any money. The last reason that bluffing is essential is that bluffing allows you to dictate the flow of the game. When you are aggressive with your bluffs, it forces other players to play more passively, holding hands that they otherwise would have won. With those benefits of bluffing, let's look at one of the pitfalls. One of the pitfalls of bluffing is it weakens your credibility. And if you bluff too much, experienced players are going to capitalize on this. They're going to do that by calling you much wider. So if you are one of the players that is getting called by third pair or even ace high, and the other player, your opponent, being correct, that's because you are bluffing too much. They know you are over bluffing and they are calling you much wider profitably because of that. So what are some signs that you might be bluffing too much? Well, the first one is if you are bluffing into multiple people, multiple opponents, or are bluffing in multi-way pots. The reason that this is so bad is because there's more players in the pot. There's a much higher likelihood that one of your opponents has a hand that they just will not fold because it's too strong. And so even if the bluff is the correct, quote unquote, correct bluff, if it was heads up, you have the right blockers, everything else is correct, it doesn't make it a good bluff multi-way. You find yourself bluffing at any high frequency in multi-way pots, that is a dead giveaway that you are bluffing too much. For now, if you are one of the players that you think you might be bluffing too much, just stop bluffing in multi-way pots. I'm not saying never bluff in multi-way pots long term, but for now, until you can adjust accordingly, stop bluffing in multi-way pots. Another sign that you are bluffing too much is if you cannot define clearly why you are bluffing. You cannot answer these questions. Do you have the right blockers or unblockers? Does your line make sense? Do you have a range and or equity advantage? Can't answer those questions. You don't have a clearly defined reason why you are making the bluff. Then do not bluff. You are bluffing just because you have a quote unquote feeling that you should bluff here. Don't bluff. A feeling in poker is not a good reason to make a decision. Okay. You hear that a lot from weaker live players. Online pros, you'll never hear that from. And the reason is because we see so much volume. With online pros, we can easily see 100,000 hands in a week, 100,000 hands of poker. And so we know from the data, the feelings are meaningless. Feelings are just something you get, right? But it's not actually based on anything related to playing good poker, right? To playing, winning, crushing poker. Stop making decisions in poker because you have a feeling. Start playing correctly. The last sign I'm going to talk about that you may be bluffing too much is if you are bluffing into players that are clearly calling stations. If you know a player just never folds, do not bluff them. On the plus side, though, what you do against those players is now you get to value bet much wider. If these are players who are constantly calling with ace high, or even there's players out there who will call with king high, right? Well, now you get to start value betting your second or third pairs on the river because they will call you. But stop bluffing calling stations. I know that seems obvious, but there are a ton of players who do that. And if that's you, it's okay. But let's improve and stop doing that. So when is bluffing most effective? Bluffing is most effective when you are bluffing in the correct spots, aka you have a defined and clear reason why you are bluffing. You can answer those questions that I stated earlier. Do you have the correct blockers? Does your line make sense? Do you have a range and or equity advantage? You can answer all those questions and you have a clear reason based in solid poker strategy why you should make the bluff, then that is an effective time to bluff. Another time when bluffing is most effective, or another thing I should say that will make your bluffing more effective, is using the correct sizing. So understanding based on board textures and action on previous streets, is this a spot where you want to bluff with efficiency? And bluffing with efficiency, what that means is you're betting small to take down a larger pot. The reason this is a good thing sometimes is that if you are making a high efficiency bluff, meaning you are betting small into a larger pot, the bluff has to work less often in order for it to be profitable, right? So if you are betting $100 as a bluff into a pot of $1,000, you don't have to get your opponents to fold very often in order for that to be a profitable bluff. However, if it's a spot where you are never going to get the bluff through with a high efficiency bluff, and it's a spot where you should be betting pot or over betting or even 200% pot bet, then under betting, or sorry, let me phrase that, sizing too small there is a massive mistake. So bluffing is much more effective when you use the correct sizing based on the action on other streets, pot size, and a whole bunch of other factors. And it gets pretty complex. There's one reason that you may want to consider hiring a coach, because those complex spots and complex pieces of theory are things we can help you dive into and fix. Lastly, bluffs are most effective when you time them correctly, aka you take into account your position, your stack sizes, the tendency of other players, things of that nature. If you can time your bluffs correctly, they will become much more profitable and they will work much more often. What are some practical tips for improving your bluffing? The first one is actually a great practical tip just for improving at poker in general, but that's to track your hands and all your sessions. This is why I urge players to play online while they're trying to become a really good player. because all of your hands are tracked. Each data point is tracked. Stack sizes are tracked. The exact amount that was bet on each street on each given point of action is all tracked. So after each session, you can go back and look at your hands and do hand review after every single session, which I urge you to do. You can look for spots that, if you're not sure, was this a good bluff here or not? Well, now you can go run them through GTO Wizard or Pile Solver or the solver of your choice and find out. Tracking hands and doing session reviews are massively important for figuring out if you're bluffing too much, too little, but it's also great for just improving at poker in general. Another practical tip is actively take notes on players that you play with frequently and adjust accordingly. Lastly, work on your table image, aka balance your ranges. Make sure that you're not someone that's over bluffing or under bluffing. Balance your ranges correctly so that way people cannot exploit you. With all that said, bluffing is an essential part of becoming a winning player. But if you are over bluffing, you are going to be bleeding money or setting money on fire. So stop over bluffing. And guys, remember, track your sessions, do your session reviews. Good luck and go crush.